Have you ever imagined being faced with your own truth and not recognizing it? Today, we'll learn the true story of a man who questioned Jesus with all the authority in the world, but the answer he received was so profound that it silenced him forever. It is one of the most dramatic scenes in the Bible, recorded in John chapters 18 and 19. Pontius Pilate, the Roman governor, the most powerful man in the region, was about to conduct the most important interrogation in history. He wasn't a follower of Jesus, nor was he seeking spiritual answers. He was a political leader, accustomed to dealing with criminals and rebels. But when Jesus was brought before him, something extraordinary happened. Pilate's question to Jesus still resonates after 2,000 years. But it was Jesus' answer, or rather the lack thereof, that created one of the most powerful silences in the entire Bible. Prepare to discover why this silence was more eloquent than any words, and how it continues to answer our deepest questions about truth and life. When Jesus was taken to Pilate's palace, no one expected that encounter would change history forever. It was very early in the morning when the religious leaders brought Jesus to the Roman governor. John records that they did not enter the palace to avoid religious defilement, as they wanted to participate in the Passover celebration. The situation was full of contradictions. They were concerned with ritual purity while handing over an innocent man to die. Pilate had to go outside to speak to them, something that certainly angered him. Pilate had ruled that region for almost 10 years. He was known for his efficiency and authority. He had no patience for political games. But when he saw Jesus, something intrigued him. This man didn't look like an ordinary revolutionary. There was no desperation in his eyes, no arrogance. There was something different about this man that immediately caught her attention. The palace, normally filled with loud voices and negotiations, became eerily quiet when Jesus entered. Pilate, accustomed to intimidating with his presence, suddenly felt himself being watched. To understand the importance of this meeting, you need to know who Pontius Pilate was. Pilate represented the power of the Roman Empire in its most troubled region. He was the man who decided life and death, war and peace. His words became law immediately. He was not a religious man. For him, spiritual matters were useful for maintaining order, but they were nothing more than that. He had seen many prophets proclaim themselves to be sent by God. He had executed rebels who claimed to have divine missions. He was skeptical by nature and practical by necessity. But he was also intelligent. He knew when something was outside the norm. And Jesus was definitely outside the norm. His wife had had disturbing dreams about Jesus the night before. The Bible records that she sent a message to Pilate, "Have nothing to do with that just man, for I have suffered much today in a dream because of him." Imagine the situation. A seasoned governor, alerted by his wife, faced with a prisoner who didn't fit into any known category. It was the perfect setting for questions he'd never asked before. And that's exactly what happened. There comes a time when even the most powerful are faced with something they cannot explain. For Pilate, that moment had arrived. John records that Pilate entered the palace and called Jesus aside for a private conversation. He wanted to speak away from the shouting of the crowd and political pressure. This was an unusual move for someone in his position. The first question was direct. "Are you the King of the Jews?" It was an accusation that could have justified execution. But Jesus' answer completely surprised him. "My kingdom is not of this world. If my kingdom were of this world, my servants would fight that I should not be delivered up. But my kingdom is not from hence." Pilate was accustomed to two types of prisoners: those who denied everything or those who took pride in their crimes. But Jesus did something different. He completely redefined the question. He spoke of a kingdom, but of an entirely different nature. Pilate's curiosity was piqued. "So you are a king?" he asked. And Jesus' answer was even more intriguing. "You say that I am a king. For this I was born, and for this I have come into the world, that I should testify to the truth. Everyone who is of the truth listens to my voice." Then came the most famous moment of this dialogue. Pilate asked the question that would echo through the centuries. Before we reveal this historical question, if you're impacted by this biblical reflection, please like and subscribe to the channel. This encourages me to continue exploring these passages of Scripture. Now, let's move on to the defining moment. After hearing Jesus speak about truth, Pilate asked a question that revealed much about his own search. What is truth? 3 simple words, yet they carried the weight of all human questions about life and purpose. Pilate had grown up in a culture where great thinkers had debated the nature of truth for centuries. For many, truth was an abstract concept, something to be discovered through reason. For others, truth was subordinate to what worked politically, but there was Jesus, speaking of truth as if it were something personal, as if it were possible to hear the voice of truth. This deeply intrigued Pilate. What kind of truth was this? The question wasn't asked with contempt. It was a genuine question from a man who had seen enough of life to know that absolute truth was hard to find. It was the question of someone who, perhaps for the first time, was faced with someone who claimed not only to know the truth, but to bear witness to it. What happened next was completely unexpected. Jesus, who had answered all the other questions, who had discussed kingdoms and purposes, simply fell silent. The silence that followed Pilate's question was unlike anything the governor had ever experienced. The Bible records that immediately after asking the question, "What is truth?" Pilate went out to speak to the religious leaders. There is no record of any response from Jesus. The silence was total and immediate. But why didn't Jesus answer? He, who had given powerful answers to his opponents, who had silenced critics with his wisdom, who had never left a sincere question unanswered, why was he silent now? The silence was not one of contempt or disinterest. It was a silence charged with meaning. Jesus had just said, "Everyone who is of the truth listens to my voice." The answer to Pilate's question didn't need to be spoken. It was right there before him in person. Jesus had declared elsewhere, "I am the way, the truth, and the life." Truth was not a concept to be explained, but a person to be recognized. Pilate was asking truth itself about truth. Jesus' silence was the most eloquent answer possible. It was as if he were saying, "Pilate, you are asking what truth is, but the truth is right there before you. The question is not what, but who." That moment of silence changed Pilate forever. The impact of that silence on Pilate was immediate and profound. Something inside him knew he had stumbled upon something extraordinary. When Pilate went out to speak to the religious leaders, his first words revealed the effect Jesus had had on him. "I find no fault in him." It wasn't just a legal verdict, it was a personal confession. He tried to free Jesus by offering to release a prisoner for the Passover. When the crowd chose Barabbas, Pilate insisted, "What evil has he done?" The governor was wrestling with his own conscience. The Bible tells us that when the leaders mentioned that Jesus claimed to be the Son of God, Pilate became even more concerned. Jesus' silence had planted a seed of recognition that was now growing. Pilate returned to the palace and asked a desperate question, "Where are you from?" But again, Jesus didn't answer. The pattern was repeating itself. Pilate's most profound questions were met with silence that forced reflection. Frustrated, Pilate tried to regain control. "You won't speak to me? Don't you know that I have power to crucify you and I have power to release you?" It was then that Jesus broke the silence with words that would completely redefine Pilate's understanding of power. "You would have no power over me unless it were given you from above." The effect of Pilate's encounter with Jesus went far beyond that day. It fundamentally changed how he viewed power, truth, and justice. The Bible records that from that time Pilate sought to release him. This phrase indicates a definitive change in the governor. He was no longer simply following protocol, he was fighting to do what he knew was right. The political pressure was immense. The leaders shouted, "If you release this man, you are no friend of Caesar. Whoever makes himself a king opposes Caesar." It was a direct threat to his career and possibly his life. Pilate tried one last strategy. He brought Jesus out and said, "Behold your king." There was irony in these words, but also recognition. Pilate knew he was in the presence of someone special. When the crowd shouted, "Crucify him," Pilate asked a question that revealed his inner struggle. "Shall I crucify your king?" He could not convince himself that he was doing the right thing. Even though he bowed to pressure, Pilate had a sign made for the cross. "Jesus of Nazareth, King of the Jews." When the leaders protested, he firmly replied, "What I have written, I have written." It was his last attempt to honor what he had recognized in that silent encounter. Why does Jesus' silence to Pilate remain one of the most powerful responses in history? The answer will transform your understanding of truth and faith. Jesus' silence wasn't empty. It was filled with purpose and love. He knew Pilate wasn't really seeking a definition of truth. He was facing it and needed a moment to process this reality. Jesus had already answered Pilate's question indirectly. When he said, "Everyone who is of the truth hears my voice," he was indicating that truth is not something that is understood only with the mind, but something that is recognized with the heart. The silence forced Pilate to look beyond words. The Bible teaches us that spiritual things are discerned spiritually, not just intellectually. Pilate was accustomed to exercising power through words and decrees, but Jesus demonstrated a far greater power, the power to transform through silent presence. Sometimes truth doesn't need to be explained, it needs to be experienced. That silence echoed far beyond the palace. It reached every person who has ever asked the same question: what is truth? In a world full of conflicting opinions and differing versions of the facts, Pilate's question remains relevant, and Jesus' answer remains the same. Truth is not an abstract concept, but a real person. It is not something to be debated, but someone to be encountered. What happened to Pilate after that encounter? History reveals a transformation few know about. Historical records suggest that Pilate was never the same after Jesus' trial. He became more hesitant in his decisions, less confident in his own judgment. Some ancient traditions claim that his wife converted to Christianity. Others suggest that Pilate himself had a deeper encounter with faith years later. What's most significant is how Pilate is remembered in history. He could have been just another governor forgotten by time. Instead, his name has been mentioned in Christian creeds for 2,000 years. His question, "What is truth?" has become one of the most studied questions in history. Universities dedicate courses to the study of that brief palace dialogue. Pilate discovered too late that he had been in the presence of the answer he had been seeking all his life. Jesus' silence was not a refusal to answer. It was an invitation to acknowledge the truth that stood before him. How many times do we also miss opportunities to recognize the truth because we are looking for complex answers to simple questions? Pilate's question is our question. In a world full of conflicting information, we all ask, what is truth? We live in an age where facts seem less important than personal opinions, where everyone has their own truth and all are considered valid, where finding absolute truth seems impossible. But Jesus continues to offer the same answer he offered to Pilate. He himself is the truth. Not one truth among many, but the truth, absolute, personal, accessible. Jesus said, "You will know the truth, and the truth will set you free." Notice that he didn't say one truth or one version of the truth. He spoke of the truth, singular, definitive. Jesus' silence to Pilate teaches us something profound. Sometimes truth doesn't need to be defended or explained. It defends itself through its own presence and power. Truth has a power of its own that manifests itself when we encounter Jesus personally. If today you are asking the same question as Pilate, what is truth? Know that the answer does not lie in complex theories or complicated philosophies. It lies in a person, Jesus Christ. He continues to say today what he said 2,000 years ago. I am the way, the truth, and the life. And he continues to offer the same life-changing encounter that changed Pilate forever. Pilate's question, what is truth, remains one of the most important questions anyone can ask. And Jesus' silence remains the most powerful answer. Pilate was searching for truth as a concept, but discovered that truth is a person. He was searching for something to understand, but found someone to know. He wanted an explanation, but received an encounter. Jesus' silence wasn't a lack of answer, it was the fullest answer possible. He was saying, "Pilate, you're asking truth itself about the truth. Stop searching and recognize who's standing before you." Mapaliu. If this reflection touched your heart today, share this video with someone who is also seeking the truth. Leave a comment sharing how Jesus has revealed himself as the truth in your life. Subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications for more Bible studies that can transform your perspective on life's big questions. And remember, in a world full of relative truths, Jesus remains the absolute truth. May you, unlike Pilate, recognize the truth when it presents itself to you. May you answer Jesus' question, "Everyone who is of the truth hears my voice." Are you listening? The same Jesus who silenced Pilate with his presence wants to reveal himself as the truth in your life today. Not through complex arguments, but through a personal encounter that transforms everything. May the powerful silence of Jesus echo in your heart until you find in him the answer to all your questions about truth, purpose, and life. May God bless your journey, and until the next reflection,